Hi there. George R. R. Martin made another blog post this week in which he revealed the full writing staff for House of the Dragon Season 1. And by full writing staff, I mean it's 8 people. 8 separate people, and yes, they have roundtable meetings in a writer's room. I know, it's mind-blowing. That Game of Thrones didn't do that, and because they presented it to us as normal, we all just accepted, okay, I guess Benioff and Weiss are personally writing most of these, and what really got me is, for years I accepted it as normal that, okay, they promoted up their personal assistant Brian Cogman to be a staff writer. And then there's that video of him in season 7 laughing as he says, "You're not supposed to do that," and he does what they tell him to do, that this isn't how screenwriting works. You don't just have people staring and going, "No, I can tell an entire page of inner dialogue behind their eyes," and we actually saw them. Their scripts read like novels. That isn't how screenwriting works. That most of Game of Thrones was written by 4 men who, between them, didn't have a screenwriting degree. It's Benioff and his 3 cronies, his 3 personal assistants he promoted up. Well, there was Cogman, and then later on there was Dave Hill, who was just the new Cogman. He was another writing assistant who he'd been writing the histories and lore since season 2, and they started letting him write an episode in season 6 onwards. I've said this in other videos that Weiss is really just the first Cogman, that he needed a lackey, and it would have been weird if Benioff said, "Hi, I've never worked in television before. Let me have exclusive control of your adaptation with no oversight." But if he introduces himself as, "Hi, we're the writing duo of Benioff and Weiss," it seems more credible. But it isn't really a co-equal partnership. It's all Benioff. And even then, even he didn't know how screenwriting works. And the stuff he brought up at Austin Film Fest, where this all came to a head belatedly, spending a full hour laughing about how we were unqualified, even admitting word for word HBO was pressuring us to hire well-known career screenwriters, and we refused over their objections because, well, anyone would outshine them. And then, after an hour of bragging about this during the Q&A, the clouds burst. Someone said the Emperor is naked. This woman in the Q&A just said, "Why didn't you hire women or writers of color?" And well, because we were best for it. They didn't really have a good answer to that. There is none. That it is unusual for an Emmy-level show to have so few writers on it. And let me head this off right away if you're going to talk about diversity in the writers' rooms. Oh, I'm an SJW. In and of itself, I don't think that's the issue. It's lack of diversity is a symptom. It's a symptom of a bigger underlying problem of cronyism. The cronyism that you're hiring unqualified people, it's not a full writing staff. One of the big warning signs, the stuff we've seen with award shows like Oscar so white, Emmy so white campaigns, and that got really bad with the Golden Globes. They even shut down the Golden Globes. There was no ceremony this year because it was just whoever could bribe the judges the most. And yeah, even projects by white men were getting snubbed by the Golden Globes. Like obvious that major critics thought were amazing weren't getting nominated at all because, well, you're not part of our in crowd. The fact that many women or non-white people were also not part of the in crowd just makes it more obvious when there's some kind of cronyism or inner circle going on of favoritism. And it's a symptom of that. And I don't want to get too much into this. We're going to yell about this more later. Like, I think Julian Fellowes was okay without a writer's room. He personally wrote every episode of Downton Abbey and now The Gilded Age. Well, I don't think we should be yelling about the diversity there, because he has shown he's good at writing women. He's good at writing people of color, non-white. I use either term. But now he's introduced like black characters in The Gilded Age. They're well received. This isn't comparable to how since season 1 there was always this criticism that Benioff is he's a pig. He's an excitable frat boy who faked his way into running a TV show. And he's just Daddy Warbucks's neglected son who is acting out. And he's a hound dog that he is just obsessed with sex and stuff. And it was a not funny joke in season 1 that relative to the novels it's based on, he was writing women terribly and offensively. And just over time, there was like invented rape and stuff. It's just people were so defeated they stopped complaining, which was horrifying. And mostly the women's stuff, but also to an extent the race stuff, like with what they did to TV Dorn. Like, after what they did to the Sand Snakes and Ilaria Sand, how dare you tell me that not having women writers or writers of color for that wasn't an issue? That this was an insult. More to me is the hypocrisy of it. That major news sites, who allegedly are SJWs proudly and yelling about lack of diversity on other projects for women or race, kept their mouths shut about this. It was the elephant in the room no one wanted to talk about, that, yeah, it is unusual that this show doesn't have a writer's room, or women for 5 years on it. It's terrible. And that why are we asking this after the final season aired? I mean, there's specific reporters who I'm angry, who like are women, that why weren't you calling them out for lack of women in the writer's room? Like, I've seen you making articles about other shows need more, why aren't there more women there? And you weren't making them about Game of Thrones. And you just didn't point it out. That if you were okay with them being that way, fine. It's the hypocrisy of you are well-known people who are all about we're diversity. It's like when HBO in season 7 and 8 was actually trying to spin this as an empowering show for women, when there aren't any women in the writer's room, that there aren't really that many people of color working on it behind the scenes. And you're actually a terrible example to the rest of the industry by the standards you have set for yourself. This is hypocrisy. And the reason I need to stress this a lot is also, guys, it's not just, oh, I'm a bleeding heart SJW on this. I'm trying to win back everyone who left the franchise in disgust. Like, I have frequently encountered women on social media who say, I am hesitant to come back to House of the Dragon because of how badly the original installment wrote women and it had no women behind the scenes. So I've been making profiles of behind-the-scenes writers, directors, and stuff. Just these are experienced people, even just in terms of heterosexual white male. Oh, look, they hired a competent person and not Brian Cogman, the affable, smiling, friendly guy who's just manipulating you because he actually has no training or experience in screenwriting. And he's just another con man. He is not your friend. He is manipulating you, and you fell for it. The whole nice guy act. He's even explained that, of, well, I act nice and everyone seems to trust me. I can't believe people get duped by that. So I'm dashing this off audio only and unedited because it's just a quick update, because I am very far behind schedule. I want you to read Martin's update. That this will be a series of videos, that I've already done videos like 20 minutes on a single writer when we learned writers that were going to be in season 1. But we learned of 4 new ones in Martin's post today, a few days ago. I'm behind schedule. If you watched my schedule video, you've seen I'm a little behind schedule because there was a lot of news, and then I had family medical problems in and out of the hospital with family members, but I'm up to the point where I can be making videos again. So, that when I was dealing with the sick people. So, catching up now. This is just I realize it's just a catch-up video. Check that out if you haven't already, /preview. That if you see my schedule video, I said, after I handle all the recent news and HBO Max expansion stuff, I'm getting back into my series that I've been wanting to do on cast profiles on, like, Olivia Cook. I need to get back to that. Thematic videos, some specific House of the Dragon things. The first one I really need to get to is crew. I've done videos on the concept artists or the costume designers. The only ones left are the 4 directors for season 1. So now that we know of all these new writers, these 4 new writers, it makes sense to report on this long form, 20 minutes per writer of these 4 new people as part of the behind-the-scenes crew series. So I was already doing directors, so I'm just lumping that in with writers and directors. There's a series of videos I'm going to be making 2 or 3 weeks from now. And the reason I'm doing this is people didn't vet Benioff and Weiss properly, and no one called out, why is Cogman a staff writer? He doesn't have any writing credentials. We just accepted it because they presented, oh, this is normal. And it's not my fault for not knowing that. It's HBO itself it's the brazenness of when you do it openly like that. You don't understand that they're just bluffing their way through it. That we need to review each of these people, and it's upsetting to me how little attention mainstream news sites are devoting, how little attention to, hey, there's new writers on this project. Who are they? Compared to how they would be all over this if it was cast members. When writers have a bigger impact on what the show is. And think about, when's the last time we actually had a new writer to announce before this? Obviously, I've been going over Charmaine Degratte and Sarah Hess were already announced. They're major executive producers, major core staff writers, and I will be going over that. But I mean, on Game of Thrones, when was the last time they had a new writer? It wasn't like, hey, here's this year's new writers. They were the same people. I mean, Dave Hill was an assistant they promoted up in season 6, but the last time we got a new writer was when Vanessa Taylor joined in season 2. And she left after season 3. She wrote 1 episode in season 2, 1 in season 3, and then she left. And I want to research, like, what the hell is her dynamic like with Benioff and Weiss, because there wasn't a writer's room. She didn't have roundtable meetings with them. Apparently they just assigned her, like, 2 chapters to adapt per script, and she did it. But it wasn't a functional thing, and I realized that was just pretense. Of under pressure from HBO, they had said, okay, we'll hire 1 woman, and then got on with it. But you know how sometimes with the hardcore fan set, they'd be excited about what directors are we getting this season. We never did that for writers because there were no new writers from one season to the next, like on a normal show. Or like how Breaking Bad fans can tell who writes which episode from the core staff and discuss their writing style. We didn't have that. So it is weird, like when I'm reporting on, I've already done detailed, with lots of slides, breaking it down, 20-minute apiece videos on Charmaine Degratte and Sarah Hess. Charmaine was an executive producer on The 100, and Sarah Hess, oh, she's got a big career. She worked on House for many years. She worked on Orange is the New Black for many years. She's a big career screenwriter. So in the description box below, I'm going to link to Martin's blog post, plus my 2 earlier video profiles on Charmaine and Sarah, and I've already talked about Ryan Condal and other stuff. Who are all the other writers? That there's 4 new writers that that have been introduced here. Again, I'm doing this unedited. I'm just putting it out audio only. This is a heads up and a preview that there's 4 new people, and I'm going to talk about them in the upcoming Writers and Directors of Season 1 series in like 2 weeks. Okay? That actually Martin explained what happened, that there was sort of a Season 0 writer's room. This confused us for a bit, that there was a brainstorming session for basically writing the story Bible, the basic outline for the series as a whole. Or like characters, it's not a full novel, it's an outline, it's an in-universe history book, Fire and Blood. So like when they were deciding, like, questions we have, like, how are we going to handle the unreliable narrator? We have to pick one version of events, are we going to show different ones? Some of the main cast, like Rhaenyra and Alicent, have decent characterization in Fire and Blood, but like when you get down to the 2nd and 3rd tier, what would Cregan Stark be doing? Or Joanna Lannister should probably be built up a bit more, things like that. So the brainstorming said that makes complete sense. That was a full set of things. That there were 5 people in the brainstorming session. He explains this in the blog post. Martin himself, and this was what he was working on. He was collaborating on this, unlike the Long Night pilot. Ryan Condal and 3 other people. T. Mickle is actually a longtime personal assistant, writing assistant for Martin himself. I asked her about this over Twitter months ago. Her name is pronounced T, even though it's spelled T-I, but she said it's tea like the drink, not tie like a bow. So T. Mickle, who's his assistant. Wes Took is Condell's assistant. He was a staff writer on his old show Colony, the alien invasion thing, so he came from Condell's thing. And there was also Claire Keishel, who was one of the staff writers on the Netflix cult hit show The OA. Now, we knew that she wouldn't actually be writing for season 1, because I think she mentioned a couple of months ago on Twitter, I'm not sticking around for season 1, I'm moving on to a different project. So this isn't too much of a surprise, it's just nice to get an explanation from Martin. He said that Claire Keishel and Wes Took will not be returning for season 1, that they didn't get thrown out. I mean, they contributed in the brainstorming process to the story Bible, the overall arc of the show, maybe some of the characterization. But they left before the season 1 writer's room was assembled. That makes sense, okay? They were around for the brainstorming session. And Martin also said he himself will not personally be writing an episode because of all of his other writing commitments. He was heavily involved in the brainstorming sessions, had a lot of discussions with Condell, and as Condell explained in a recent podcast, he is in very frequent contact texting with him about various lore questions and things. So he talks about this in the blog post. So that's where those two writers went. They're not part of season 1 anymore. Mickle is part of the season 1 writing staff, even though she's not credited with a specific script. When Martin listed off, these are the 8 writers on the season 1 writer's room, she was in the middle of the list. That she is in the room in the meetings and in the discussions, and when you have other normal TV shows, when you have a round table of 8 people, one person's name is on the script, but other people's fingerprints are on it, other ideas that were discussed. So there's elements of season 1 that she was in the discussions for. I hope she gets a specific writing credit for season 2, but we'll see what happens. So she's in there. I already talked about T. Mickle just because I keep saying Ty in my head. I have to keep saying T because I know it's T. Mickle, I already talked about in prior videos, listing off people, and she hasn't had that much specific going on, but she's worked closely with Martin for years, just as an assistant. So that's Ryan Condell, Charmaine Degrette, and Sarah Hess we already knew about. And we already knew about Mickle, that's 4 people. Who are the 4 new people out of these 8? Gabe Fonseca, Ira Parker, Kevin Lau, and Eileen Shim. Now keep in mind, this is just the dashing it off. I read off their stuff from IMDb. The heavy research of interviews they've done and where did they go to school? Do they have screenwriting degrees? That will be a 20-minute video on each that I'm making in 2 weeks. But the short version, Gabe Fonseca previously worked as a staff writer on Private Practice from 2011 to 2013. A couple of other shows. He wrote one episode of Jessica Jones Season 2, Marvel's Jessica Jones. And he was an executive producer, writer on that Wu-Tang and American Saga show. That all of these people, all these 4, do have prior writing experience, which is more than Benioff ever did. Some of them have 10 years experience, 7 years experience. The last 2 are relatively new, but they have worked on shows before. So there's Gabe Fonseca. He's worked on all of those. Ira Parker, he was a staff writer on a couple of things since... says here, Rogue in 2015, 4 in the Morning. He was a staff writer on The Last Ship. I know that one. The Last Ship, the virus pandemic show, and then there's the famine thing. The Last Ship, he was a staff writer on from 2016 to 2018. And most recently, he has been a writer and co-executive producer on the comedy show Better Things. I don't watch that, I've seen commercials for that. So Ira Parker, also a career screenwriter. Kevin Lau, a bit newer, but his first writing credit was for a Western drama show, Damnation, in 2017 that ran for 1 season. But most recently, he's actually been a pretty high-profile writer at HBO itself. One of the stable of writers that are contracted to HBO and they move between projects. He was a staff writer on Lovecraft Country and for The Nevers. I know The Nevers was messed up by Whedon's whole debacle, but the writing's actually pretty decent from what I've seen, and people liked Lovecraft Country. And not only was he a staff writer on these two projects, he was also a story editor, so you're reviewing scripts and things. So a bit more recent, but he is an established writer. He's worked on Lovecraft Country. He's working on The Nevers. So that's Kevin Lau. And actually, we had heard his name going around for a while in 2019, just as we heard Sarah Hess's name going around. I have to update all this, but if you ever Google her name and see Sarah Hess is listed as attached to the Blood Moon Long Night pilot, no, it's, as far as we can tell, only Jane Goldman wrote the one script for the pilot episode of the canceled Long Night prequel, which was awful. What we think happened is they hired Kevin Lau and Sarah Hess and other people as part of the HBO stable of writers that they would then assign to a TV show, that they hired Sarah Hess to work on the first season of whatever the first Game of Thrones pilot to get greenlit to full season would be. And because Long Night never had a first season, I don't think she ever even touched it remotely. So I've seen one or two people getting confused by, oh God, was she attached to that? No, she was going to be working on the first season of whatever Game of Thrones prequel came out first. So Long Night's all on Jane Goldman. They never mentioned... House of the Dragon had this mini writer's room of 5 people, including Martin, talking about what the series as a whole would be. To my knowledge, the Long Night pilot never did that. Martin himself kept stressing how even he was barely involved. He was not involved on that. And Jane Goldman never gave interviews, never tried to win over the fan base, and never mentioned, I'm having a roundtable with other people to discuss my decisions. We don't know what the hell was going on there. Compare that to this, where they're like 5 people laid out the story Bible, then we moved things around and hired up a season 1 writing staff of 8 people. So I'd heard the name Kevin Lau when I heard Sarah Hess back in like 2019 of people that HBO has hired up to work on projects. And as we saw, actually, since 2019, Kevin Lau worked on Lovecraft Country. So they assigned him to something else. He has a contract with HBO, so that's fine. Lovecraft Country, Nevers, people know. So he's an experienced writer. The last one is Eileen Shim, who is a relatively new writer, but she, like I said, I have to go through her profile to look for. She has 1 writing awards. She has writing degrees. She went to Yale. She actually did run her own show for 1 season relatively recently, that she's a horror writer. And she's worked on a couple of other projects or shorts, but she developed and was showrunner on a 1-shot, 1-season horror show that ran on Hulu in 2019. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever heard of this show, Light as a Feather? Ran on Hulu? You know, like, it's like the sleepover game, stiff as a board, light as a feather, like from The Craft, and then like a Ouija board. Oh no, demons are real and stuff. Light as a Feather was a horror show she developed for Hulu. So she has work experience from that, and there's videos online of her talking at writers' conferences and things. I need to go through all of that. She actually seems pretty interesting. She explained she was born in South Korea and only immigrated to New York in the United States when she was 9 years old. It's this video of her saying, I take fantasy seriously. I learned to speak English by reading Harry Potter books. I learned to get good at it by reading Harry Potter. So it's not, you're assigning me to a fantasy show. It's, I love fantasy. I grew up with Harry Potter reading it and getting better at English with it. She said she's into a lot of gothic horror, like Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, other things. That she has a literature degree, comparative literature, focusing on gothic horror. So Eileen Shim also seems really interesting. Again, I'm doing all of this in one take. I feel like I should edit it. I know this is 24 minutes long, but these are the new writers. All of them have at least some experience, and it's a sliding scale. I mean, Eileen is the newest one, but then there's Degrette and Hess, who have 10 years experience as major executive producers. Even Fonseca, Parker, they've been in this for 7 to 10 years. Lau also worked on high-profile things. So this looks pretty good. And it's 8 separate people. I'm going to yell about this more detailed in the other thing, but I don't want this to run very long. If you are concerned with diversity, and we need to win people back to the franchise who are disgusted with that entitled, privileged, you are a trust fund baby, with Benioff failing upwards, that we need to win everyone back. We hired real writers, and it's diversity, and it's not all of that. That if you actually look at this by the numbers, 4 of the writers are women, and 4 of the writers out of 8 are people of color. So it's half and half. Well, there's 3 women of color on it. So, plus Kevin Lau, who's the Chinese American. So, yeah, it's half men, half women, and half aren't white. People of color. So, yeah, they actually have really good diversity behind the camera on this. Well, that's going by writer count. By episode count. Oh, Martin didn't talk about this in the blog post, but they updated IMDb the same day to list off the writers for every episode. We already knew the directors for every episode, now we know the writers. Again, I'm going to go over this in a lot more detail in 2 weeks when I make full-fledged videos on this. It's just a heads up. But we found out that, let's see, Ryan Condal is writing just 3 specific episodes. 1, 2, and 10. Which makes sense. The important stuff is the premiere and the finale. And compare that to how Benioff and Weiss were like giving 1 episode to Cogman and maybe 1 to Hill in the later seasons, and then they'd be writing like 8 out of 10 episodes or 5 out of 7 in the final stretch of things. And it's that the showrunner shouldn't be micromanaging it that much. So Condal wrote episodes 1, 2, and 10. Episode 3 is written by Gabe Fonseca, and there's a co-writer credit for Condal, so 3.5 co-writing with Condal. Episode 4 is written by Ira Parker. Episode 5 is by Charmaine Degrette, which is the big Rhaenyra Laenor wedding episode, which we see in the trailer. There's going to be a lot of characters in it. And for some reason they said they credit it as with revisions by Sarah Hess, so I guess she had an idea that changed it enough. They said this deserves giving her also by credit, but mostly this is Charmaine's episode. Episode 6 is written by Sarah Hess, Episode 7 by Kevin Lau, Episode 8 by Eileen Shim, Episode 9 by Sarah Hess, and then Condal for the finale. This is literally the first time in this franchise that there was a different writer from the showrunner who wrote more than 1 episode. Like throughout the run of Game of Thrones, even like the early seasons, like Cogman would write 1 episode, or Martin wrote 1 episode, or they gave Vanessa Hill 1 episode a season, but like season 2, season 3, the only person who wrote more than 1 episode in a given season was Benioff and Weiss. That there weren't other real staff, they were monopolizing it. And look at this, Sarah Hess is credited with 2 full episodes. Plus an also by, for episode 5, that she wrote episode 9, episode 6, and episode 5 she co-wrote with Degrette. So, yeah, and she's credited as a co-executive producer for season 1. She is a core staff writer on this. Her and Charmaine, I think, are sticking around for season 2. And just, this is the first time that someone has written more than 1 episode. They're not even back-to-back episodes. It's not like one big one they split in half. They're 3 episodes apart. So, that's pretty exciting. And when you look at the breakdown, again, it's 4 out of 10 episodes this season were written by women, all of whom are also women of color, because T. Mickle isn't credited with a specific episode yet. So 4 out of 10 written by women who are all women of color, because Sarah Hess wrote 2, and 5 out of 10 episodes are written by persons of color, non-white people. Kevin Lau is Chinese American. Both Sarah Hess and Eileen Shim are Korean American. And as I explained this before, Charmaine Degraté, she's Louisiana Creole, like Beyonce. That she said, well, she considers herself black, but she's mostly Dominican. It's a mix of a couple of things, but Louisiana Creole. Compare this to all the complaints, the belated complaints for Game of Thrones long after the series finale, when they're going, wait a minute, this show didn't have women or non-white writers. We just had this 13-year-old frat boy in an adult's body writing his sex fantasies, and this is awful for a major work of literature. That by writer count it's half and half, and by episode count it's also pretty much half and half for race, 4 out of 10 for women. This is pretty good. Also, Sarah Hess is LGBT. She's married to another woman. Gay characters in season 1, like Lenore and Jane Eyre, that'll be handled well. Or we've seen her writing that well on Orange is the New Black. That there'll be some representation behind the camera for that. I do not have time to get into this in too much detail. I'll yell about this in the director video. I'm already half an hour into this. But we already knew all the directors. There's 4 directors, 2 of whom are women. And I pointed out, Game of Thrones never had a writer-director pairing of women on a single episode. There was never an episode that had a female writer and a female director. And we were complaining about tonally you don't get, this is not presenting women well. There's all this male gaze stuff because Benioff is a pig and the sexposition. We've never had a writer-director female pair on an episode before. This season doesn't just have the first pairing, it has 3 pairings. There are 3 episodes with female writers and directors. Episodes 5, 8, and 9. And not even the same, because there's more than one female director. And one episode has a trifecta. Episode 8, which for some reason is the only episode Geeta Patel is directing, is written by Eileen Shim. But Geeta's cinematographer, Catherine Goldschmidt, also a woman. So we had once we had a director and cinematographer female pairing. I looked it up. It's like episode 4.5. And it's not that much. I mean, the cinematographer only has so much influence on it. But we never had a female writer with a female cinematographer either. And this is just me looking through my notes. I'll present this slowly and clearly in the full video. Episode 8 has a female writer, director, and cinematographer. This has never happened before. We're getting 2 other episodes with writer-director pairings. And I keep saying that of the 4 directors, 3 directors are doing 3 episodes each. And then Geeta Patel is doing episode 8, and it's the only episode she's doing. And we kept wondering, tell me if you remember the comments. I pointed out, what's so special about episode 8 that it's the only one she's doing? We're pretty sure episode 8 is going to be a big, complicated feast scene. It's going to be the reconciliation feast that doesn't really work out. After the Silent Five Valarians thing, where aging King Viserys tries to bring everyone together for a feast of the blacks and the greens. And they're at each other's throats, and it's just this awkward dinner thing with a lot of characters. It's the scene where Aemond mockingly toasts them. Why, look at Rhaenyra's sons. They're so strong. Why, have you ever seen such strong boys? It's that feast from right near the end of The Rogue Prince. So it'll have all of the main characters in it, if you think about it. Rhaenyra, Alicent, all of their children from both sides. And you think about it like, oh, it's an interior scene. Filming one person on a horse riding across a field from one side to the other is actually pretty straightforward, versus a really detailed dinner scene with literally a dozen major characters. You have to fit where all the cameras are going to go so there aren't other cameras in the shot, how to get coverage over each person. It's really complicated to film a scene with that many major characters all in one room, all talking to each other. So maybe she's doing that because it's more intense, because it's like the one episode that has all the core characters in it before they split up and we don't see them together again for a long time. I guess it's almost a weird mirror to the Winterfell feast at the beginning of Game of Thrones, but it's right before the finale. It's the blacks and the greens the last time they're face to face at this feast, and they're insulting each other at this awkward family dinner from the two rival branches. On top of that, again, the trifecta, episode 8, also woman, not just woman pairing, woman of color is the writer, woman of color is the director, because Geeta Patel is just South Asian Indian, Eileen Shim is Korean. So if you think, oh, I'm a bleeding heart SJW, I see this diversity as a screw you to how incompetent and the cronyism that was going on in the Benioff era. That you didn't even have other writers, much less the elephant in the room, that, wow, there aren't women in season 6's writer's room. Don't talk about it. Don't criticize the show. Like, I'm thinking of the fan sites like Watchers on the Wall, who, as of yesterday, haven't posted an update in 4 months, even though there has been news going on. Like, I don't know what's going on over there, but they wouldn't point out there aren't women behind the camera anymore, because you do not criticize this show, even for something so blatant and against our values. The hypocrisy got to me. So these are the new writers. They all have career stuff. There's a lot more diversity behind the writer's room. Just saying, remember like when I was doing the Sarah Hess video, or the Charmaine one a couple of months ago, and I said, when I was listing off the directors, I said, we hope that there's a single female writer-director pairing in any one of these episodes. We have 3 of those, and episode 8 is a trifecta. They even have a female cinematographer. There is diversity behind this. Charmaine Degraté is the first black writer on the show. Asian writers in there. Good stuff. So this is just a preview. I dashed it off audio only. Read his short blog post. We know the episode breakdown by writers now. And I'm going to link to the profiles for Charmaine and for Sarah, which I already made. That we need to vet writers before they become uncontrollable tyrants like Benioff did. Before. We need to know who they are before they come in the door. As opposed to, wow, it was 4 years into this show before literally at the end of season 4 was when I first saw, wait, Benioff doesn't have a screenwriting degree? I just assumed he had one. No one told me otherwise. Everyone just assumed. That's the strategy. Just walk in, act confident, and people assume you're qualified, because he's a con man. All of these people have credits to their names. Martin said some of them won't be back for season 2. Some do intend to come back for season 2 if they get it. Presumably like Charmaine, Sarah. I hope I hope Mikkel gets an episode to herself eventually, like the way Dave Hill got promoted up eventually. So this is really good news, and I keep doing this month after month. I've tried to win people over. People in the comments saying, my hope is there's people in the comments saying, I wasn't going to watch this show until you kept pointing out with videos they're actually hiring competent people behind the camera. Look at all the people they're hiring. Look at all the behind-the-scenes things that are objectively different now than in the Game of Thrones era. If you don't trust HBO, HBO has been sold twice since Game of Thrones ended. First to AT&T, now to Discovery. There are different people in charge now. So, if the same people were in charge at HBO, I would not be following this. If this was still Richard Plepler's HBO, it's not. It's Discovery's HBO, because they bought out their parent company. So that's pretty much what's going on now. I am very late, and this is audio only. I hope you're just listening to this in the background. I am very far behind on updates, but I will do a more detailed dive on each of these 4 new writers as I research them when I do the remaining behind-the-scenes crew at House of the Dragon stuff, when I was going to do the directors. It's now not the director series, it's the writers and directors of Season 1 series, which is After I catch up on recent news, I'm going to launch that in about 2 weeks' time. So please stick around for that, like and subscribe, and tell me if you're familiar with the work of any of these other people. So I am encouraged by this news.